Welcome to the Healing Grove podcast. I'm Dr. Kristin, an integrative holistic family physician, author of Life After Lyme, and host in this virtual space of learning, healing, and growing. I believe humans are like trees, and our physical limb is only one of many. Health on all limbs of the tree, emotional, conceptual, social, spiritual, is absolutely required for the whole tree that is you to be vibrantly well. I created the Healing Grove podcast as a place to showcase some of the world's best integrative and holistic medicine, to expose you to transformative tools and mindset shifts for all limbs of your tree. I hope you enjoy our conversation in the Healing Grove today as much as I enjoyed having it. So, Anita Johnston, Ph.D, CEDS, is a psychologist, a storyteller, a certified eating disorders specialist, and the author of Eating in the Light of the Moon: How Women Can Transform Their Relationships with Food Through Myth, Metaphor, and Storytelling, which has been published in 7 languages. And I happen to have one of those languages right here with me. It's an amazing book, highly recommend it. She's been working in the field of women's issues, eating difficulties, and body image distress for over 35 years, and is currently the clinical director of Ipono, Hawaii, which has an eating disorders residential treatment program in Maui. And she's the executive director of eating disorder programs for the Integrative Life Center in Nashville. She's also the co-creator of the Light of the Moon Café, which is a really cool online space that I've been learning about, a platform where women can interact and share their work and their journey together around their disordered eating. It's also this book, I think, serves as kind of the workbook for that course. Is that right? Super cool. And she'll tell us more about that because I think it's launching again soon, maybe in January. Yeah, awesome. We'll hear more about that today. She also is the author of a number of self-study courses and a bunch of cool information that you can get online on her website. She provides virtual individual consultations, and she conducts workshops around the world. She's best known for integrating metaphor and storytelling into her training as a clinical psychologist to help explain the complex issues that underlie struggles with eating, exercise, and body image. So I'm so grateful that you agreed to speak with us today, Anita. I'm so happy you're here, and I'm so excited to just learn from you and have a conversation with this beautiful group of people.
I've been looking forward to it, so I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So would you mind starting by just telling us a little bit about what brought you to this path that you're on and this sort of set of tools that you are going to spend some time talking about?
Okay. Well, I took the scenic route, right? This wasn't just a direct path. Let's see, how did it begin? Well, I've always been interested in women's issues. I'm originally from the island of Guam, which is in a very matriarchal family, and it's a matrilineal culture. And so I'd always been surrounded by strong women. And so I was just always curious about that experience of being in the world in that way. And so how the disordered eating came into play was that I was supervising a psychology intern many years ago in the very early 80s, like 1982 in Hawaii. And she was doing her doctoral dissertation on the incidence of eating disorders in Hawaii. And so we would get together to talk about this. And we had a third woman who joined us, who was a social worker, but had her own eating disorder. And she had to figure out her recovery all by herself. So the more we got together and started talking, we said, my goodness, there's so many people here that are struggling. There should be a center for this. And of course, after we said it about the 5th time, we realized, okay, we're it. And so we created this center, and girls and women of all ages, all sizes, all ethnicities started to show up, and all struggling with issues around their body and eating. And so at that time, no men were showing up. So I got very curious about this. First of all, why was it women and girls? Second of all, why was it these women and girls? And third, why was the struggle around eating in the body? So that began my journey of really just trying to figure out as best I could. And because I'm a storyteller growing up in a multi-ethnic culture where a lot of the teachings were through story and a lot of the discipline as well. I started to listen as a psychologist, as a story listener, right? Because that's what I am as a psychologist, to see if I could find what was it? What was the common denominator of these folks that came from all different walks of life? And so that's when I started to see that storytelling would help me get to that level of depth and understanding, so I could find that common denominator. And what I found was that these girls and women were very much like the child in the fairy tale, The Emperor's New Clothes. And for those of you that don't remember the story, or maybe you weren't told it, I'll give you a brief version. There was once this emperor, and he wasn't too concerned about ruling his kingdom. He was mostly interested in fine clothing and jewelry. And so he had quite the reputation for this. And a couple of con artists heard about him, and they came into town and they said, oh yeah, well, we're tailors. And in fact, our clothing is so fine that only those fit for their station in life can even see it. Well, this impressed the emperor, so he commissioned a whole new wardrobe for himself. And the con artist pretended to cut and stitch cloth that really wasn't there. But all the people that worked for the emperor went on and on about his magnificent clothing, and because they didn't want to lose their job. And even the emperor himself was so, verbose about how wonderful this was, because he didn't want people to think he wasn't fit for his station in life. So the con artists, they leave town laughing all the way to the bank. And then there's this grand procession where the emperor is going to wear his new outfit. And of course, he's totally naked, right? But all the townspeople are oohing and eyeing about wonderful, magnificent clothing, because they didn't want their neighbor to think they were stupid. But there was a child in the crowd that said in a very loud voice, "But mommy, the emperor has no clothes on at all." And when this child spoke, it created a ripple throughout the crowd, and everyone saw the emperor for the fool that he was. So what I was starting to see is that these girls and women were like that child in the sense that they had an uncanny ability to perceive subtle realities. And what I mean by that is they could read between the lines, they could see the bigger picture, they could perceive hypocrisy, they could sense when things were not okay, even if everyone around them said things are just fine, they could sense something. But because their lives weren't fairy tales, whenever they spoke up about what they were perceiving, they were either ignored, rejected, ridiculed, in some instances abused, and or they would choose not to speak up about what they were perceiving. One, because maybe they just could feel it, but they didn't really understand it, or they didn't know how to put it into words, or primarily because what all children want, what all of us want, is a sense of belonging, but they confuse belonging with fitting in. And there's a difference. So with fitting in, you try to look like and act like and think like and feel like how you imagine others want you to look and act and think and feel. With belonging, you connect with others while you stay connected to your essential self. So because they wanted to fit in, they had to disconnect from their true self. That creates a lot of pain, by the way, for all of us. This is not just folks with eating disorders. Okay, we all do this to one degree or another. But when you do that, it creates a certain tension inside your being. And eventually that tension becomes very painful. And you'll do anything you can to cope with that pain, whether it's binge on food or restrict food or drugs or alcohol or shopping or whatever. And so, like I said, we all do this to one degree or another. But what happens is that it sort of becomes a one-trick pony for someone struggling with an eating disorder. That's a long answer to your question.
Well, and there's so much in there that we could unpack. I think, and people will have the replay, right? But it's so beautifully said, and it really helped me, I think, to read that in the early parts of this book, to read that this was the common denominator. Like there were all sorts of pathways to eating disorders and all sorts of stories, and some families were really supportive and great, others were really disconnected, and that wasn't the common denominator. The common denominator was a young, usually a woman, but could be anyone, a person who had felt they couldn't be their authentic self and had made, for whatever reason, chosen these behaviors to kind of numb out the pain of that.
There's
So
another ingredient that you can add into there. What I discovered is these folks were what I call thin-skinned. So they were emotionally sensitive and highly intuitive, but they didn't want to be, nor did they have the skill set, because we live in a world that does not value that, right? We live in a world that says, oh, you're too sensitive, you're overreacting, and certainly doesn't give us the skills for dealing with our emotions. And someone who is very emotionally sensitive, their feelings are strong, their feelings run deep. What might be no big deal to somebody else penetrates their very bones. So where are they going to learn how to be a thin-skinned person in a world that values being thick-skinned? And intuition in this culture is considered like crazy, right? It's like, if you don't have the facts, then it's not real. And so if you are highly intuitive, you can pick up, these folks can walk into a room, pick up on the vibe, and sense when things are not okay, or they can read the room, or they can perceive what other people want of them and provide that before those people even know that that's what they want. They're that good, but they're not taught how to work with this superpower.
So I think, and I know everyone in this room, and I know there's a lot of people in this room who I know can resonate with having that, having felt too sensitive for this world, or, having felt like, how am I going to survive, the fact that no one else is talking about the elephant in the room. Mm-hmm. So what are some tools that we can use with our children, with our young people, to help them feel connected to their power around this and to give them what they need to survive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tall order, because we do live in an emotionally illiterate culture. We just do. We barely have the language for it, but that's a language that can be learned. And in fact, there's one skill that I've seen, over all these years, I've seen thousands of people totally, completely recover. And I mean recover, period. End of story. No food obsessions, no weight obsessions. I know it's totally possible, because I get the stories all the time. I know lots of these people personally. But there's one skill that I've never seen anyone fully, completely recover. You can sometimes white knuckle it through, but this is the skill you need for total freedom, and that's assertive communication. And if I had it my way, that's a skill that would be taught in every school in the country, because maybe you use your algebra. I don't, but I have to use assertive communication every single day. And so what is it? It's the ability to identify, accept. Sometimes that's hard to accept our feelings. We have to accept that we feel angry even though we don't want to be angry, or we feel embarrassed even though we don't want to be embarrassed. You have to accept that's the reality I'm feeling. And so to identify it, to be able to recognize what the feeling is, to accept it, and then express it in a way that honors your experience and the experience of the other person. Because remember, I talked about that belonging thing, right? This is how you stay connected to your essential self while you connect with others. You speak the truth about your experience in the kindest way possible. And so I remember when I discovered this skill, it transformed my life, because I certainly wasn't taught it. And so that's one of the things is really learning this. In fact, I'm so passionate about this. I did create a self-study course on assertiveness, just on how to do that. How I create a little formula, because it's a language, and like any other language, you have to kind of begin in a contrived way. I remember when I was learning Spanish, and it was so awkward, like ¿Dónde es la biblioteca, right? So in the beginning, it is like that. But then eventually, once you learn the language, it's the vehicle for taking those deep innermost feelings and putting them out there in the world, because that's where they belong. So that's one skill.
So helpful. I wonder if you could give us a couple of examples of what that sounds like, just so that people can have.
Yeah. Okay. Here's the formula. When you In fact, I even have something here. Let's see. Oh yeah, here we go. I don't know if you can see this, but here, when you, and so that's where you just describe the facts. When you leave your towel on the floor. Second part is, I feel. You find one feeling. You don't want to use too many words when you're learning this language because you'll be tripping over your own tongue. So I feel annoyed. When you leave your towel on the floor, those are the facts. I feel annoyed. Now here's the hard part, but this is where the transforming part, this is the piece where using this style of communication actually is transforming someone that might be struggling with eating or anything else. And that's the third and the hardest part, because now you have to say, how come that particular behavior stirred up that particular feeling in you? We have a tendency, because of the way we're taught, to use the word make. When you leave your towel on the floor, you make me so angry. Well, you got to pull that word out. One, because it's accusatory. You're blaming somebody else for your feeling, and it's not true. Nobody makes you feel anything. They may do something that'll stir those feelings up, but those feelings are inside of all of us. They just get stirred up from time to time. So they're your creation. So you have to own it. You just say, I feel. When you leave your towel on the floor, I feel annoyed. But now, how come? And that's when you say either because it gives me the impression, because it seems to me, because I get the idea. Now you're truthfully giving your interpretation. When you leave your towel on the floor, I feel annoyed because it seems to me that you don't appreciate how hard I'm working and you expect me to pick up after you. One sentence, boom, there's the truth. And learning this, learning this takes practice. It's a skill like any other skill, like riding a bike or swimming or driving a car. You only learn skills through practice. You don't learn them from watching somebody else or reading about them. And so it's helpful just to practice using this formula. You can even do it in a positive way. When I asked you to pick up your towel and you did it right away, I felt so good because it seemed to me you appreciated how hectic my schedule was. Boom. One sentence.
Wow. And I love it how even in the positive, you put the because in there. Something about that because really does make it personal, but not attacking. It just owns kind of the impact.
And it requires to do a little soul searching, which means you're connecting with your authentic self, right? You're strengthening that connection rather than fraying it. And I believe that's really where the power resides. So in some instances, it's not appropriate to use the formula. Maybe, you wouldn't want to say to your boss, wow, when I look at you move those numbers around, I feel concerned because it seems like you might be doing something improper, right? You could get fired for that, right? So there's times you don't use it, or there's some cultures where that's considered disrespectful to say, Grandma, when you say things like that, I feel mad because it sounds like you're making fun of me. Some cultures that would be considered disrespectful. So what's important here is that you know exactly what you would say should you choose to say it. And so that too takes practice. It's good to have a little journal where you jot it down at the end of the day, say, okay, what are the instances where I could have used the assertiveness formula? And you just go through that.
Beautiful. Do you find that when your clients begin practicing these tools, they get any pushback or blowback from their loved ones who are like, what is that formula you just unloaded on me?
Oh, no, you can count on it. In fact, there will be pushback because it's so rare that someone says, oh, thank you for sharing that. I had no idea. That may happen, but when you're telling somebody something that they may not want to hear, there's a good chance you're going to get pushback, and the pushback is going to come in the form of 3. So here's the flip side of this formula. It's called the deflection. So this is verbal martial arts, because what's going to happen, remember, and it's nobody's fault. We live in this emotionally illiterate world. So what's going to happen is people are going to tell you why you shouldn't be feeling the way you're feeling. When you leave your towel on the floor, I feel annoyed because it seems like you expect me to pick up after you. Well, you leave your stuff all over the place, right? That's what you can expect. And here's what you do. Verbal martial arts, you do not ever, ever, ever get into a discussion about who's right and who's wrong, because there are no right or wrong feelings. There's no good or bad feelings. Feelings just are. There's right or wrong behavior, of course, right? There's nothing wrong with feeling like smashing someone's face in. There's absolutely something wrong with doing it. So they're going to try to tell you, though, because they don't know any better, why you shouldn't be feeling, well, you leave your stuff around all the time. This is the verbal martial arts. You don't take that head on, you sidestep it, and you say, that may be so. You're not saying it's so. You're not saying it's not so. You're not going to get into an argument, because if you do, you're going to end up down the road someplace arguing about something. Wait, how do we end up arguing about this? Right? We've all been there, right? You're going, wait, where do we get? We were way over here. Now we're here. Don't go there. It's a distracting element. So you just say, that may be so, but I want you to know, when you leave your towel on the floor, I feel really annoyed because it seems like you expect me to pick up after you. They'll come back a second time and they might say something like, you know what? You're always picking on me. I can appreciate that's your perspective, but it's important to me that you know this is how I feel when you do this. Third time. Well, you're really in a rotten mood today. You know, what's your problem? Maybe I am. You're not saying you are. You're not saying you're not. Maybe I am. You're sidestepping it. But it's important to me that you know how I feel when you do this. Now, after 3 times, they're going to run out of steam. And maybe they'll go, whatever. But what has happened is you've made your point. You've not steered away. Your point is simply this. This is how your behavior affects my feelings. For your information, you can continue to behave in that way. You can continue to leave your towel on the floor, but you can no longer do it in ignorance of how it affects me, because I'm going to tell you every single time. You simply repeat yourself. Because a lot of people will say to me, I tried and it didn't work. And I go, wait, what do you mean you didn't work? Well, they kept leaving their towel on the floor. Well, yeah, because the goal of communicating assertively is not to change the other person. It's not to change their behavior, their attitude, their perception, their feel, none of that. Why? Because you're not capable of that. You can give them information that maybe they'll change, but you can't make them change. The goal is to identify, accept, and express your feelings in the kindest way possible. So you're not doing this. That's your goal. And that can absolutely be accomplished every single time, regardless of how the other person responds. So that's why it's so empowering. It does take emotional strength, but more than that, it builds emotional strength when you're using the formula. And I'm with you. I wish I had learned this a long time ago, because my life would have been somewhat different. My relationships, some of the struggles might have been a little easier. It certainly helps in your discernment in relationships, because you'll find out very quickly which people in your life you want to get really close to and which people you want to keep more in the periphery. You'll discover that. One of the things too with kids, I remember one time my daughters are now in their late 30s, but this was years ago. I had just learned this. And so I started talking like this with my kids. And one day my daughter had gone off to school and left a note for me. And the note said, "Mommy, when you said you would sign my permission slip and you didn't, I got angry because you broke your promise." I went, the formula. Now, I never sat my kids down and taught them the formula, but I started talking that way with them. And so they learned it. So I kept that note. It was like, oh, yeah. But the stress comes from having the expectation that they will change. So this is where Angelise Arion, she was a psychologist, anthropologist, and she's no longer on the planet, but she would say, here's what you got to do. Show up, pay attention, tell the truth, and don't get attached to the results. The results aren't yours, by the way. You're not in charge of making the world behave itself or other people behave themselves, right? Because they're not going to always. But what you can do, show up for yourself, right? How am I feeling? Getting very clear. Pay attention to what's going on inside of you. These are my feelings. Outside of yourself, this is the behavior. Show up, pay attention, tell the truth in the kindest way possible. and then don't get attached to the results. The first three, they're hard enough to do as it is. You need all of your energy to be working on those three. You don't want to leak it in terms of just trying to control the results.
So beautiful. I think this is a real bonus piece to this talk. I didn't expect to get into the formula, but I think it's so crucial. A lot of people have commented in the chat how kind of mind-blowing and helpful and how basic, like someone's like, why isn't everyone learning this in kindergarten? Like,
That's how I feel.
this is so basic. So thank you so much for that kind of reminder and walkthrough of it. And I want to get to the eating disorder stuff, because I think it might be tempting. All right, I'm just going to own this. I have noticed as I read this book that I share a lot of similarities with people who you've seen struggle with eating disorders as a result of being overly sensitive or very intuitive, or, seeing around corners and kind of being told their whole life you're from a different planet. And so I'm tempted to be like, okay, dodge that bullet. But I think there's probably other things that people like us are at risk for. And therefore, still a great idea to learn how to get in touch with and express and own your feelings, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk a little bit about, even though it's not really about food, eating disorders aren't really about food or body image. So often that's a piece. I mean, that's a piece of it, obviously, if you have disordered eating. But I think even for people who don't qualify for an eating disorder or have disordered eating, bring some issues to their relationship with food that come from not expressing feelings. And I'm thinking that because I read your book, and I wonder if you would talk to us about how to like kind of peel that onion a little bit.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's not like there's these folks with the eating disorders and then there's us, right? It doesn't quite work like that. It's a continuum. And we are all hardwired to use food to soothe ourselves, right? When we're little babies, we're in distress. What are we given? The breast or the bottle? And we go, okay. So we're designed that way. The problem comes when you don't learn other skills for self-soothing. And maybe, again, if you're super emotionally sensitive, highly intuitive, you need lots of skills. You need the big skills, and there's no one to teach them. And so all of us, to one degree or another, have. I mean, when I was in graduate school, right before an exam, I would find myself in the fridge like this, right? Was I hungry? No. Was I feeling performance anxiety? Yes. I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to write this paper or learn what I need to learn to pass the class. And so we all do that to one degree or another. So I think it's just kind of important to understand that. But where with disordered eating, you enter the world of paradox, because it's about food and is not about food, right? And so having to straddle that is really hard, because again, our culture will tell us it's all about food. It's all about food. It's the shape of your body. It's the size of your body. You need to eat this. You shouldn't eat that, blah, 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 blah. And actually, that's the red herring. So red herring is a whodunit mystery, like who killed the old lady? Is it the maid, the butler, the chauffeur? And everyone's watching the maid because she's unusual, she's different, she's avant-garde. And at the end of the story, there's a twist. It was the butler, who nobody suspected because everybody's watching the maid. So with struggles with eating and food, of course it's about food. It's getting played out in that arena. But that's where the disordered eating is designed to hold your attention, which is why diets can be very destructive, because the real issues never get resolved. The real culprit never gets explored. And so that's where, and again, for all of us, not just for eating disorders, but if you're eating and you're not physically hungry, or you're not letting yourself eat when you are hungry, right there's some emotional or spiritual hunger going on there that would be worth your while to find out what it is, because no amount of food or no amount of food restriction is ever going to resolve that hunger. So I can give an example of how all of us can do that, whether you're struggling with that, whether that's a main struggle in your life or it's just something you notice, because it's a way. this may sound odd, but I believe that this is a pretty profound path to greater consciousness. Is that whenever you find yourself behaving with food in a way that is not in alignment with your physical needs, there's a message for you, there's information for you. And honestly, this is why I work in this field, because when that starts to get revealed, it's pretty extraordinary. So you want to go there? I'll show you how to do this. Okay. All right. So first of all, you start off using your superpower, which is the power of your imagination. Okay. And so some people say, oh, I don't have a good imagination. And I like to say, what do you think worry is, right? Worry is a bad use of a good imagination. We all have really good imaginations. So we begin with that. Imagine you have two tanks. Tank A, I'm going to call them, and tank B. Fancy names. Tank A is the tank you fill when you need physical nourishment. You fill it with food. Tank B is the tank you fill when you need emotional or spiritual nourishment. You fill it with things like attention, affection, appreciation, meditation, prayer, and so on. But what happens is that for most of us, because we're not taught otherwise, we get the two all tangled up and we think there's just one tank. So before we know it, tank A is full and overflowing and we're still hungry, right? Or we don't even want to get close to tank A because it seems like the bottomless pit and it'll never end. So what has to happen is we have to tease the two tanks apart. And the way you do that is through interoceptive awareness, learning to read your inner states, and in particular, your hunger and satiety. So if I say to someone, what's the physical sensation you feel when you're hungry and where in your body do you feel it? Often someone might say, oh, I get lightheaded or dizzy. That's not hunger. That's famished. And what's going to happen if you wait to eat until you're famished, right? You, me, the rest of us, we're going to eat everything we can get our hands on. The sensation for hunger is subtle. It's a whisper and it's not a shout. So I might say, and then what's the physical sensation of fullness and where in your body do you feel it? And maybe someone will say, it's hard to breathe or I have to unbuckle my belt. That's stuffed. And if you eat until you're stuffed, what's going to happen is you're going to have a body size that's not right for you. So learning hunger and satiety signals is a really important part because that's how you untangle the two. You start to identify. There's a real exercise you can do is that I recommend if you don't know, and most of us, we're not taught this because we're taught to eat because other people are eating or because someone who loves you fixed the food or because it's time to eat, blah, 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 blah. And we disconnect from really reading our own internal signals. So a way to start is, let's say all you know is lightheaded, dizzy, stomach growling loudly. So you get the food and you eat 2 bites and you tune in and you say, am I still hungry? If the answer is yes, you say, how do I know? And you look for a physical sensation in the body. It's a sensation, a contraction, an expansion, or heaviness, or a lightness, a roughness, a smoothness, a hollowness, a density. You get the idea. It's a sensation. And you keep going 2 bites at a time, each time asking, am I still hungry? If the answer is yes, you say, how do I know? And you find that sensation until the answer is no, I'm not still hungry. And you say, okay, how do I know I'm not hungry? And you look for that sensation. So that's just a quick, how to disentangle the two. But for the sake of this discussion, let's imagine that you nailed it. You know your hunger and satiety signals. You can describe them perfect. You can identify them. You're really clear. Now you're reaching for the pizza. You check in because you learned to check in for a hunger signal. Not a hunger signal in sight, but you still want to eat that pizza. Anyone been there, right? So guess what's happened? You have just tumbled down Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole and you've landed smack dab in tank B. And in tank B, pizza is not pizza. Food is not food. What is it? It's a concrete physical symbol of another kind of hunger you're experiencing and probably don't even know about because it's unconscious, which simply means it's out of your awareness. So what do you do? Well, the question you ask yourself then is, what's the feeling I'm trying not to feel? Now, we talk about eating for emotional reasons, but really we're eating because we don't want to feel our emotions in that instance, right? And so you might do, so where could there possibly be a feeling I don't want to feel? And you do a scan of your day, maybe I'm still ticked off at the jerk who cut me off on the freeway, or maybe I'm concerned about an upcoming parent-teacher meeting, or maybe I'm annoyed with something my boss said, or I'm hurt about something that my girlfriend told me. You do a scan of your day. Where could there be a feeling that I might not want to feel? But I'm here to tell you that more often than not, the answer is going to be, I don't know, I feel fine, right? Because it's unconscious, it's out of our awareness. So the good news is the food will tell you. The food is talking to you, but it's talking to you in the language of metaphor. It's coded. And to get the message, you have to crack the code. So I'll show you how to do that. Want to learn how to do that? Okay. So here's the basics. And if anyone wants more detail, you can just go to lightofthemooncafe.com, and there you can download a free PDF that will spell all this out, so you don't have to scribble it all, but I'm going to tell it to you right now. So here's how it goes. Sweet foods usually have to do with either feeling like we're not sweet enough or there's not enough sweetness in our life. Think about how you might use the word sweet, right? Oh, what a sweetheart. Oh, that was such a sweet thing to do. Oh, sweet, right? Think about what sweetness is in your life. Crunchy, salty foods are usually associated with unexpressed anger and frustration. Soups and stews are often connected to a craving for emotional warmth. Spicy foods, and remember, this is either if you're restricting that food or craving that food. You're afraid of that food or you really want. Spicy foods have to do with a fear or longing for excitement, stimulation, and change. And chocolate, we know this from Valentine's Day, right? Love, romance, sexuality, sensuality. And so to give you an example of how this works, I was working with a woman and she was struggling with bulimia. And I said to her, I said, okay, if, I'd like you to tell me if there were a food that you wished you could eat with no consequences whatsoever, zero consequences. If there were that food, what would that food be? And she said, oh, that's easy. Vanilla ice cream with strawberries on top. And I said, okay, I want you to imagine I've never had vanilla ice cream with strawberries on top. And you're going to tell me what's so fantastic about it. And she said, it's sweet, it's smooth, and it's refreshing. When we took a look at what was going on in her life, her boyfriend was accusing her of not being sweet enough. She'd hit a rough patch with her parents that she was desperately wanting to smooth out. And she was in a dead-end job in need of a refreshing change. There's 6 months of work right there. But that's really where the food is pointing you towards what's really going on. There's a Zen saying that says, don't get stuck looking at the moon, the finger pointing to the moon. Look at the moon. So sometimes it's the words themselves. So I had a client, she was an emergency room physician, and she was struggling with compulsive eating. And she came rushing into my office once, and she was so upset with herself, just beating herself. She's like, can't you believe what I did? I was disgusted. I said, well, what did you do? She goes, well, I got off of work and I came home and I fixed dinner for my husband and I made some chicken tenders. And before he even got home, I ate them all myself. I can't even believe I did this. I said, whoa, let's back up. So, okay, so you were in the ER, what was it, 12, 14-hour day? What kind? Tending to all kinds of emotional and physical trauma? And she said, yeah. And I said, so what do you think you were really hungry for? And we'd worked together for some time. So she said, a hug. I said, yeah, you wanted some TLC, some tender loving care, and instead you ate the chicken tenders. Now, this is how it works in our psyche, folks, I tell you. And because I'm not always on target, and but this Metaphor was on target, and I saw the lights go off in her eyes. Now, what after that, she could never eat chicken tenders again if she was not hungry without asking herself, do I need a hug? So it's important to understand tank B is only after you've ruled out the physical experience. And you know you're eating when you're not hungry or not eating when you are hungry.
I just want to share that when I was in residency, I would always wear these socks that were super expensive, like $9 socks. And I would always get chicken tenders. And I called it the entitlement platter, because I was staying up all night and I needed to feel like I was loving myself up. So that really, really resonated.
Mm-hmm. I told you, this is powerful stuff, right? It really takes you to some deep truths inside yourself, some deeper desires. We think the problem is food. No, the problem is our desires that aren't being met. And so it gets played out through food, and they don't get met because we don't know how, or maybe we're used to not even looking in that direction. Maybe we were taught at an early age that you just got to do what you should do, and what you want doesn't count. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons that we've been taught not to tune in to our desires and to fulfill them. Or at least lay the groundwork so that they can be fulfilled. I'm not talking about immediate gratification always, right? It's like if you have a desire to fly a plane, well, there's steps that need to be taken before you just can't go out and fly the plane. So recognizing that, but the food will tell you. That's the coolest thing, you see. What appears to be a struggle is actually, it's sort of like the red light that goes on in your car. So metaphorically, if you think you got yourself a brand new car and you're leaving the dealer and you've never had a car, and you're so excited and you love this car, and then all of a sudden these lights start going on and dash, and you go back to the dealer and you go, I love this car, but these lights, they're really annoying me. Can you disconnect them? And the dealer says, well, sure, I could. But before I do, let me just tell you, this light here, this is the light that tells you when you're running low on fuel. And if I disconnect it, you could end up in the middle of nowhere, stranded. And this light here, this is the light that tells you when you're running low on oil. And if I disconnect it, you could burn up your engine, and then so much for your new car. Do you still want me to disconnect the lights? You see, if you understand these urges, there's signals from a deeper part of yourself, a wiser part of yourself, a bigger part of yourself, trying to get you, telling you there's something you need to attend to here. But it's not talking in the language of everyday language that we're used to. So you have to get really curious. And the food is telling you that symbolically. It's metaphorically. And if you can get to that, it's extraordinary what you can learn.
This has been just such a rich conversation. But before we end, I really want to hear you talk, Anita, about your course and what's available for people who want to learn more from you.
Okay, so I have a lot going on. I have at the Light of the Moon Café, I've got interactive courses for women who are from around the world, and we have people from everywhere, from Dubai and South Africa and all around Europe and Canada, and struggling with any kind of struggle with eating or body. And so there's a series of 3 8-week courses, and every single day there is an activity. So we use Eating in the Light of the Moon. So let's say the first day of the week might be, this week we're reading chapter 7 in Eating Light of the Moon. And then the second day will be me telling a story about that. And then the third day will be story questions where you can see how this applies to your life personally. And then the fourth day might be me telling a metaphor, an audio of that. And then the next day might be a drawing or writing activity. And the next day might be a playlist of songs. And then there's a forum, and everyone communicates on the forum should they choose to. Some people don't. And I respond to every single comment and every single question. And we have a few live calls. So those are that's the moon modules. New Crescent Moon is the first course. Then I have self-study courses that people then can take at any time. One of them I mentioned already is the one on assertiveness, how to learn how to be assertive. Then I have one on what we talked about with cracking. It's called Cracking the Hunger Code, which is how to use the foods and to learn what's really going on in your life that you're really hungry for. And then the third one, which is just being launched in the next couple of weeks is 4 Faces of the Feminine Psyche, which it's something I've been working on for many, many years, but it's working with 4 archetypes of the feminine that you find in fairy tales, the maiden, the mother, the queen, and the crone, that correspond to different phases in a woman's life, but really because they're archetypes, they're energies that you can access at any time once you understand that particular constellation. So you can be 80 years old, and if you're starting something new and you need the energy of the maiden and you know how to access it, you can bring that in. Or if you're 18 years old and you need the deep wisdom of the crone, and you can bring that in once you understand how to do that. So that'll be a self-study course that's just coming up.
Thank you so much. I just want to honor everyone's time commitments, and thank you again, Anita, for this beautiful discussion and so many pearls. Yeah, so grateful to all of you who shared, and to you, Anita, for showing up and being who you are in the world.
Thank you for the invitation. This is what I love to do, and I so appreciate all of you showing up in the most open, vulnerable, honest way. It's beautiful.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healing Grove podcast. If you liked it, please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to deepen your experience further, consider grabbing a copy of the Healing Grove playbook. With journal prompts for this podcast and 41 others, it's the perfect place to record your learnings, keep track of the tools you explore, and reflect on your own experience. Finally, it's important to mention that even though I am a doctor, nothing you hear on this podcast, whether from myself or my guests, constitutes medical advice. Any intervention you try should always be discussed with and supervised by a trusted member of your own healing team. Thanks for listening, and see you next time in the Healing Grove.